Hi, I'm Tom Field, Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Enhanced Vulnerability Management with Analytics and Intelligence. Your featured presenter today is Samir Shelke. He's the CTO and co-founder of Augis. Now, before I introduce Samir, let me give you just a bit of background on today's session. Vulnerability management, defined as the cyclical practice of identifying, classifying, remediating and mitigating vulnerabilities, has been a basic element of the security posture in many global organizations. As the technology evolves by use of cloud, social media, and Internet of Things in organizations, the vulnerability management function grows more complex and more critical. In this session today, Samir Shelke is going to give you information on the threat landscape and how it forces vulnerability management programs to evolve, how analytics and intelligence can be added to your vulnerability management program, and finally, he's going to present a case study of one large multinational organization that has experienced this evolution and growth. I do want to take just a moment to tell you a bit about Information Security Media Group. We currently publish more than 24 international media sites. We have Bank Info Security and CU Info Security for financial services, Gov Info Security for the public sector, and Healthcare Info Security for the medical community. We also publish Info Risk Today about information risk management, Data Breach Today about breach prevention and response, and Careers Info Security. Now, each of these sites is dedicated to providing education and news regarding information security, but specifically tailored to the individual sectors. With over 650,000 members registered to our sites, we've created a true information source that tackles the key issues of interest to our unique audience. Just a few notes of housekeeping, please. If you have any questions for Samir during the course of this session, please submit them via the chat window on your screen. If any of you should experience any technical issues while viewing today's webinar, please dial the number on your screen. If you dial extension 115, we do have technical support staff standing by to help. Also, I do want to emphasize the content being presented in today's webinar is copyrighted material, and it's meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you or your organization would like to use any of the information presented in today's session or are looking for customized training education, please contact us. I'll take a moment to introduce our sponsor today, Augis. Augis is a global corporation that helps organizations manage information security risks, strengthen their security governance, and fortify intelligence frameworks in line with compliance requirements and best practices. Catering to over 380 clients across 22 countries, Augis provides a holistic approach to information risk management. For more information, please visit www.augis.com. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Samir Shelke, the CTO and co-founder of Augis. Samir has more than 2 decades of experience in the information security industry. In his role today, he is responsible for the creation, engineering, and delivery of information risk management services to clients globally. Prior to joining and co-founding Augis, he was Director of Service Development and Solutions at Fidelity Investments. Earlier in his career, he worked at Cisco Systems, establishing and managing their global service practice in India. He has also worked at Hewlett-Packard as practice head for security and managed services. He's currently based in San Francisco. And with that, let me turn this over now to Samir Shelke. Samir, it's all yours.
Well, thanks Tom, and thank you everyone for joining the discussion today. What we'll be talking about today is about vulnerability management, and something we've been sort of doing in the security industry for several years now, and talking through obviously what vulnerability management lifecycle means, as well as what are the key challenges we have seen with our customers. And I'm going to take an example of a large multinational firm and what are the challenges they saw and sort of weave it into our discussion today. We're then talking about how 2 aspects, which is intelligence and analytics, can help overcome some of the challenges and make vulnerability management more effective. And also talk about our platform, which is SAVP, Security Analytics and Visualization Platform, which essentially focuses on the analytics and intelligence piece to make vulnerability management more effective. So let's get started. So to begin with, let's talk about the vulnerability management lifecycle. Now, this is something we have been doing for decades as a basic element of managing security and implementing controls. The vulnerability management lifecycle essentially starts with discovering, which is finding the vulnerabilities in our ecosystem, prioritizing them from the perspective of severity to how it impacts our environment, then figuring out ways to mitigate them, either using patches or compensating controls or any other configuration changes, and finally verifying them to make sure that those vulnerabilities are mitigated. Now, this life cycle is, as I mentioned, something we risk managers have been doing for years and been really following the find and fix model of vulnerability management, and that's sort of what the basic philosophy of this life cycle is. When we talk about this cycle, and as I said, we've been doing it for many, many years, I think most of us would agree that we never get it right. There's something always missing in the whole process. Either we are behind the find process, we are behind the fix process, there's too much of volume and things like that. It's almost the struggle I have every morning with my breakfast is it's sometimes they just don't get it right. Sometimes there's less milk, and sometimes there is more cereal and all kind of stuff. So a simple process, but I think we just don't get it right for various reasons. And I think this discussion focuses on some of those reasons as to what are the concerns and what are the challenges we have in vulnerability management. And we take it from there in terms of the solutions which possibly will help us here. So working with customers, and I take a reference of one of our large customers. It's a Fortune 5 organization, a global organization running a very large vulnerability management program across its information assets in the enterprise side as well as the production side. What I mean by production is elements which are to do with the production systems, refineries and stuff like that. So they run a common program across both these systems. So when we look at that life cycle of discover, prioritize, mitigate, and verify, and we would like to pick up one area of concern in these areas, the top ones which came about were three of them which you see on the slide. The first one is the system of record. What that means is, how do we ensure that we have a common source of security vulnerabilities in the whole find process? Unless and until, of course, we have a good understanding of what the vulnerabilities are at various points in time, it is difficult to progress. So the system of record, or having a common system of record, is one of the challenges in the discover process. We then move on to the next challenge in the prioritization process, and obviously anything to prioritize, we need to have context. So which of the vulnerabilities really impacts the environment can only be decided if we have the context of the environment at that point in time. And of course, things change, and hence having the right context to prioritize is extremely important. And we'll talk about some challenges as well which happen there. Once we have the system of record and once we have the context and they are able to prioritize, that tells us what we need to do. And then starts the mitigation process. And again, in that mitigation process, many a times there are misses because of basic hygiene process elements as to how do we make sure that we run the process effectively for the mitigation to be effective. Now, so these three are the big challenges which we see with our customers, and of course there are many others, but we would all agree that these three tend to be the most common ones because of which we never get this process right. So again, talking about system of records, the context to prioritize, and having an effective process to mitigate. So let's talk about the system of record challenge, or the challenge during the discover process. The first is, of course, volume. And we all know that the volume of vulnerabilities which we face year in and year out are just increasing, and there are variations in terms of how CVE stats are reported and how other stats are reported and how zero-day information is found and stuff like that. So one could always discuss as to what is the right source of record there, but essentially we all would agree that the volume is all increasing. And what's also interestingly increasing, if we take from a CV stat perspective, is the volume increasing in this where the severity score is higher or critical. And as we see in the slides as well, the component or the contribution of the critical vulnerabilities is really increasing as well. And of course, those are important to address first in general terms. So one challenge we definitely face is really having number of vulnerabilities just exploding. And we, as our environment grows as well, are faced with challenges in terms of how to mitigate this big volume. Now, of course, as the technology landscape gets complex, we have enterprise systems, we have cloud systems, we have social systems and things like that. Of course, a lot more vulnerabilities affect us than earlier times. And what's really possibly going to be different, it's already different, it's going to be very different in years to come, is the whole explosion of IoT, Internet of Things. And we're already seeing a lot of Internet of Things being used in both consumer business as well as commercial business. And businesses are now starting to use the Internet of Things technologies, and that obviously is going to grow over the years. Now, that also will generate tremendous amount of volume. From a vulnerability perspective, it might just escalate a lot more than what we should see today, simply because the footprint of technology or controls you can deploy on a thing will be, in most cases, very small as compared to what we could have on Internet of Things on an enterprise environment. So obviously my Fitbit device, if I use for my healthcare data, has a lot smaller footprint than my computer and my iPad from a control deployment perspective, and hence vulnerabilities which can be exploited could be a big concern going forward. So point is, we have volume, and that volume is going to multiply big time as we go into subsequent years because of things like Internet of Things, which is being used right now. So that's the volume issue to begin with. We then talk about sources, and this is a interesting conversation I had with several customers in terms of what are the sources of vulnerabilities using which we run the find process per se. Let's go from the top here. The first, of course, is assessment technologies. We currently have very good assessment technologies in terms of vulnerability assessment, penetration testing kind of tools across the enterprise, which help us find vulnerabilities. And customers use these tools either themselves or use service providers to run these tools for them to find the various security vulnerabilities in our ecosystem. We move on to having another source, which is the intelligence services, and these are threat intelligence services, and several have come up over the years who proactively tell us what the sources of what are the vulnerabilities which possibly are there for our environment. And these services, of course, are maturing as well as time goes on, where this provide us not only static vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities which have been around, but also around vulnerabilities which are 0-day or not yet discovered. So that's of great value to us. Similar thought comes from the research side of things, where we have researchers either internally or externally in the industry who publish information and who publish findings. We find ourselves, when we do our own research as to what are the application environment we have, any coding we do ourselves, and what are the vulnerabilities possibly we are introducing there, comes from the research field, either internally or externally. We then have governmental agencies, for lack of any other term, which are the agencies like CERT and NIST and stuff like that, who really create these information as well as advisories, and we get that, and that's also a good source of vulnerability information. We then have product advisories from product companies. So obviously the large product companies, they release advisories on vulnerabilities found in their product. They sometimes release it before a patch or a workaround is available so that customers are aware. So that's a big piece of information source as well. And finally, all organizations, including the one which we works with, they also use external testing services. And what I mean by them are, these are companies like ourselves who provide vulnerability assessment and penetration testing services over a sustained period of time, either to find vulnerabilities or for compliance reasons and things like that. And the deliverable typically from testing services are PDF reports. And the reason I call this out specifically is because once you receive static information like PDF reports, their lifetime is really short, because unless that information is mined properly in a system of record, it's really not something usable from a going forward perspective. It's definitely usable during that vulnerability cycle, but from a trending and use perspective, that gets lost if that information is not mined. So if you really look at it, one hand we have huge amount of volume as far as the vulnerabilities are concerned, typically, and also high and critical vulnerabilities. And then we have various sources for the records, and depending on what we use as an organization, and all of them make a lot of sense. And I think not everybody will be using everything, but all of them are important for us. So that's the issue in the find process. So the find process is all about having a lot of volume, having a lot of sources, and then moving on to prioritization. It's very clear that we would not be able to react to every single vulnerability which we face, and how we utilize the time, how we mitigate the top risks for us is about the prioritization. And to have the right prioritization, we need to have the right context is a given. Now let's take an example of some data points which were brought up by the 2016 Verizon Data Breach Report. Two interesting points here. One is about the delta between vulnerabilities opened and closed over 2015, normalized data, of course. And you would see here that, and it's quite intuitive, that more vulnerabilities were open each week than closed. And obviously, again, as I said, it's very intuitive because a lot more vulnerabilities do come than our ability to close those vulnerabilities. And that delta, when it's on the positive side, obviously is a huge risk area for us. And obviously what it means is that we will never be able to sort of have a situation where we close everything we find, and hence prioritization becomes very critical. And the only way to prioritize is to really make sense as to what is contextually important, what is important to my environment, and how contextually I can make that prioritization. So that's one way of looking at it. The second way to look at it, of course, is the whole exposure aspects. And again, the same report talks about what's the exploitation of a vulnerability, and which effectively is a fairly long time. So most vulnerability exploitations happen between 10 to 100 days, with a median being 30 days after the vulnerability has been found, which is a fairly large window of opportunity for the bad guys to hack into systems and compromise our systems. Essentially, which again means that we are behind the life cycle of closing vulnerabilities, and the only way to do that is to prioritize the right thing using our context and really being able to close that. So that's the big challenge we face from a context perspective. Again, discussing the context aspects further, I take an analogy from economic models, which is something called the long tail concept. In economics, it talks about a long tail economy of selling more of less, which means we sell a lot more of smaller things and really create a long tail economy. That's what is happening, for example, in the e-commerce world and things like that. Now, if we take and apply that same algorithm to a security world, we have a very interesting challenge of where should we really focus ourselves. Now, if I look at the long tail concept from a security perspective, the head of that typically means these are published vulnerabilities, these are critical vulnerabilities, everybody knows about it, it's published everywhere, everybody talks about it, all tools have that capability of finding and fixing those vulnerabilities. And then you have the tail, which are fewer vulnerabilities from an individual perspective, but they're a lot more from a spread perspective, not known as much. These are very obscure in nature. They are in systems which are not very critical, and so on and so forth. Typically, in this concept, products, which are vulnerability assessment and management products, they very quickly react and include the head side of vulnerabilities and that data into their systems very well. The tail side, which are about obscure systems and a lot more spread from a severity perspective, gets missed out. So if you really look at the perspective, it's very common for us to say, okay, this really means is that the head ones are more critical, they are more likely to be exploited because the bad guys are looking at the same research information as well. So let me protect the head side of things. But we also know that targeted attacks, the bad guys are going to look at obscure things as well, which really will make it very difficult for us to control and mitigate those, and hence that's what they're going to focus on too. So where do we focus, on the head or the tail? And that again is very contextual to what is the risk we face in an organization, and those are the challenges the risk manager would face all the time. So that's a context issue as well. Finally, we talk about the process issue in the mitigation side of things. And again, this is the biggest problem we face of vulnerability mitigation, which is, how do we fix vulnerabilities which we find? And again, Gartner research, which was recently published, talked that through 2020, and which means even now, most of the vulnerabilities, 99% is a big number, are the ones which are exploited, the ones we know about already. Effectively, which means that we know about the vulnerabilities, but we are not able to fix them for various reasons, and we'll talk about some of them as we go forward. And you see average of let's say 100 days or 103 days, as one of the reports calls it, for organization to fix found vulnerabilities is a process issue, and how do we fix the process issue is key to this whole problem as well. So we talked about the issues. In summary, in the whole process of find and fix, we have issues of having a proper system of record, we have an issue of prioritization, and we have the issue of making the process work from a vulnerability management perspective. So yeah, so those are the challenges that we talked about. Now, going to the case study example I was talking about, our customer had same issues. They had a mature vulnerability management system. They were using all popular VA vulnerability assessment and management tools. As I said, they were using both on the data side and the production side, and they had tons of activity going on there. So when it came to how to make the vulnerability management more effective, we thought of saying, as to what are the issues are, and these three issues I talked about were the primary issues they were struggling with. So the answer which we deployed, and I think this is for our consideration in context of how it works for every organization, is really to use intelligence and analytics to really solve those major challenges we face. And intuitively, when we look at words such as volume and prioritization, the answer almost is analytics. And we see that used in all forms of technology today, be it retail usage, be it e-commerce systems, be it customer behavior, or all kind of stuff. I think use analytics to really solve volume and prioritization problems is very obvious, and that's our suggestion as well, is to use that as a framework in vulnerability management. Of course, even before we get to that stage, for any analytics to work, a normalized source of record is key. And unless and until it is comprehensive, relevant, and normalized, what I mean by normalized is it is consistent, and from an analytics perspective is key. And hence the approach of using intelligence and analytics to solve those problems is going to be critical as we move forward, and that's the recommendation we would like to make. We'll take examples of how these two elements work in the cases which we talked about. So let's talk about intelligence first to begin with. Now, the whole idea of using intelligence is how do we make the source of record independent of the find process. Now, what I mean by that is if we are going to rely on the find process to find the vulnerabilities which affect our systems, that alone is not going to be enough. Which means that what if we skip some vulnerabilities during the find process, we're not able to find them. We still have to make use of other sources we talked about, which is the research aspects, the zero-day aspects, the security intelligence, threat intelligence services, to advisories of product vendors, and so on and so forth. And hence, creating a system of record of vulnerabilities beyond just simple testing is going to be important. And a framework which we would like to suggest here is using, for example, things like natural language processing, which are analytical kind of systems very commonly used in the advertisement world, and worlds where there is a large amount of data to be managed can be very effectively used for vulnerability management as well. What I'm talking about in this slide is a very simple functional model of how that can be used. Let's start from the beginning of the first point being extraction, and what you see below are the various sources I talked about. Now these are research elements, these are elements around assessment technologies, intelligence services and stuff like that, and including service providers. Remember the element where the output the service provider are PDF reports which are not mined. So all of those sources and depending on which are relevant in our context can be used as an extraction element there, which is use parsing technologies to combine all of these sources and extract from them the relevant security vulnerability information, which then can be put through something called a content layer, which essentially means is how do we identify relevant content using various intelligence and analytics technologies to really find out what of it is important to us. Now, for example, we may have research information, we may have information coming from the advisories. Now, what part of it is information security related and what part of that is relevant to the set of technologies we use is where the content mapping is very important, because the volume of data coming to us is going to be very, very large. So we use extraction, then we use content analyzing systems to find what content is relevant to us, and then put it through something called a classification process. And this is where we classify the content based on the severity aspects. We classify them based on what is relevant in the topic which has been discussed, and use models such as topic modeling and stuff like that. Essentially, the entire thing which is happening out here is about how to take large volume of data, put it through extraction content classification systems, so that we eventually go down to a narrower set of data sets which is relevant to us. It's an important thing to do, which is about finding the right content which is relevant to us, because simply because of the volume of work which we're going to face when we get into the element of vulnerability management. The final step of this is the intelligence system is applying the context to the whole aspect, and here's where our asset information would be very critical. Now, effectively what it means is that we have information which is classified based on the content, which is, for example, I use X types of operating systems, Y type of network systems and databases and all kinds of technologies, and based on that now I have content which is relevant to my environment, and the vulnerabilities from various sources all normalize and put everything together. Now I take that and map it to my asset base. What I mean by asset base is not just vulnerabilities on a specific operating system, but also on the ones which is relevant to the versions which I use in my systems. So effectively, if you map the content to the assets we have in the organization, that gives us the context which can be then put into the system of record, which is the vulnerabilities which we work with. Now, all of this is obviously very dependent on how the asset information is stored in an organization. Now, most of us, our asset information is obviously based in some sort of a configuration management or CMDB kind of systems. Several organizations have very comprehensive CMDBs operating, but in the case of the customer case study I was referring to, they had not just one source, but several sources. And unfortunately, some of them were structured, some of them were unstructured sources. So hence, this process cannot simply depend on organizations having strong CMDBs. And that's where the things like the part of speech tagger, where you could have unstructured data sources and use NLP kind of systems, where as long as you can define certain keywords, that gets used in the context as well, as opposed to proper CMDB systems. So the idea here is the asset inputs are just not based on fully configured CMDB systems, but also unstructured definitions of certain keywords, which can be used to define context as well. So in summary, that's how an intelligence system in our platform will work, which is use extraction to get information from various sources, identify relevant content from all the extraction which has been done, classify it based on modeling either related to your severities or what is applied to you, and then put in the context there using asset information to really create a system of record for vulnerabilities which will be useful for further analytics, and that's what we rely on. So in summary, you see that the system of record is not just based on what we find using VA tools. It is not just based on data which is pumped to us from various intelligence sources or advisories. This system of record is extremely relevant to our environment, as to how our environment would be using that information. The second most important thing is this also mines unstructured data formats. So for example, service provider PDF reports submitted in month of April is also mined into the system of record. So once when we do the test again, either for compliance reasons, that second test report is also utilized and put in the system of records. You can compare it with what was done in the past. So in summary, we are able to create a system of record of all vulnerabilities in a common place right here using NLP kind of technologies. So once we do that, which is have a system of record using intelligence, how do we use analytics? Now what's analytics here? And in simple terms, analytics is all about taking data, converting that to information, and in turn converting them to insights. It is the same logic used in every form of analytics. Now, if you want to collect data, convert that information and then to insights, the steps which are required for that is very critical, which is for analytics to work, raw data has to be compared against a normal behavior. So unless and until you're able to take data and say what is normal behavior, what should be the normal be, you will not be able to make analytics sense out of that, and hence defining the normal is a critical step as an input into the whole analytics process. And define the normal in context of information security would be, what does severity mean to you? What are your agreements from a control perspective? What are your SLAs and turnaround times, and what are your compliance requirements? What part of compliance is relevant for you and stuff like that. So the definition of a normal behavior is very critical. The other element, and we learned this in our customer deployments as well, is the normal definition does not remain static. It is something which changes with time. It changes with technology changes, and it's never constant. So one of the challenges we have seen on technology deployments is that they are very good at one point in time, but as the environment changes, as the risk profile changes, as business changes, that modification of the normal behavior is extremely critical. So that's a piece which our platform focuses on, is ability for customers to change their normal behavior on an ongoing basis. So we do define the normal behavior, we take the data, we have information. Now, for information to convert into insights, it is completely based on who's viewing it and what is relevant for the viewers. The concept of roles come in here, wherein various roles in an organization look at the same data in very different lights. So if you are to create a visualization reporting kind of system, a compliance officer would look at the same data in a different way. A customer-facing manager would look at it in a very different way. The technology folks would look at it in a very different way and stuff like that. So whatever insight is, report can be an insight only and only if it is customized and relevant, and not just once, but on an ongoing basis. And so these two elements, which is defining the normal behavior and customizing the end result, which is reports and visualizations, are very critical for the analytics systems to work. So using intelligence, we have solved the collect problem. We have been able to create a single source of record. Now we need to use analytics to define a normal behavior and make it customizable and relevant for the environment at all points in time, not just once. And let's talk about now how it is done using a platform, and then I move on to certain visualization reports and examples which were deployed in our customer environment, which made a lot of sense, and I'm sure you'll be able to resonate with that as well. So how does the framework work? Again, this is functional architecture of the analytics and visualization part of the platform, which obviously starts from the system of record, which we already mentioned. So in summary, what the system of record gives us or gave us is vulnerability information which is contextually relevant to us. Now, we take that and then map it onto the CMDB, and we had the conversation already, which is based on structured and unstructured methods of having configuration and asset information, and apply a normalization concept. Now, what it means here is, for analytical technologies to work, we have to have normalized data sets, and there should be all visible to the analytical system as a common data set environment. Without it, in analytics or comparing it with the normal behavior is extremely difficult or almost impossible. And hence, this is the step of normalizing the information we collect from the system of record as well as the CMDBs. We then put it through something called a rule engine, and the rule engine is where the context of normal behavior comes in, and this is where users or customers of the platform define the normal behavior. This is where they define what ratings make sense to you. Maybe this default CVE ratings don't make sense. It has to be done differently for certain assets. These are certain more critical assets than others. Some business units are more critical than others, and so on and so forth. Thresholds are also defined here. What are the thresholds for closure of severity vulnerabilities or patches? What are the SLAs you would have with internal and external customers? And again, as I said, it is not one-time definition. It is something which you should be able to define on an ongoing basis, and that's where the platform can be really effective. Once you define the normal behavior, you then use something called a workflow system, and there are several standard workflow environments one could use here, and we use the PPMN 2.0 framework, which essentially is a very good framework for workflow visualization and analytics. Now, one part of workflow, of course, is things such as vulnerabilities are found, they're assigned to different resolver groups for them to fix it, and if they don't fix it in time, it's an alerting system and things like that. So that's obviously there. We all use those kind of systems. But what this engine allows us to do is use analytics on top of the workflow system, which means it gives us information on how the workflow is working as well. And again, you will see in certain forms of reports and visualization, which I'll talk about, as to how that is important for us to find out lacunae or misses in the workflow itself, which can be very useful and will really help us in the mitigation process. And final layer of the analytics and visualization platform is the visualization orchestrator. Now this uses very interesting concepts like story execution and role mapping, etc., where basically organizations themselves can create storyboards and create visualizations which are relevant to them for different roles in an organization. We all know that the executives will look at one of the data in one form, technology folks will look at different form, and the security folks will look at it in different forms. And hence, ability to have a visualization which is in control of the customer and does not require a lot of coding, etc., to be done all the time is very critical for this live system to work. And that's where concept of story building and actors and roles and all that comes in very well, which we use in our visualization orchestrating system, and really present the end visualizations in widgets, which basically the advantage of widgets is because each one of them is independent data representation. They can be customized, they can be modified, and things like that. And you will see some examples of widgets as we go forward as well. So that's how analytics and visualization can help in the process. So what did we talk about so far? We talked about the issues of vulnerability management, the issue of having single source of records, the issue of having effective prioritization, and the issue of monitoring the process. We talked about how intelligence can be used to create the common system of records. We talked about how analytics can be used to really not only analyze and prioritize what is contextual to you, but also analyze and visualize what's happening onto the process, and use a comprehensive workflow system to effectively manage and measure the process from a mitigation perspective as well. So that's how the concepts of intelligence and analytics can really help the challenges we face in vulnerability management. Let's talk about some widgets here, and I'm presenting a bunch of widgets here, which are very contextual to the customer, which I am discussing, but I'm sure this will resonate with all of you as well in terms of what may be relevant. And again, these are reports and visualizations which you can create yourself simply because you have the visualization orchestration concept as opposed to standard 160 reports available out of the tool. So let's talk about some widgets around vulnerability information now. What you see in the top left on the slide is a trending of vulnerabilities over various months, and in turn their impacts on the compliance standards which are relevant to the organization. So obviously, as you see here, these are rated. So obviously you have a less number of vulnerabilities, you are in the green zone, and you sort of go on from there on. You see what vulnerabilities impact. If you are, for example, a PCI DSS compliant, then what vulnerabilities impact that specific compliance for you. You may also have certain control agreements with clients, and hence what kind of vulnerabilities affect your SLAs with clients is the second piece. And then, of course, you could have an integrated view as well as to how your vulnerability status is. Now, you also notice here is that this is a trend. So that's the big advantage of having a normalized data environment from different kind of sources. All of them are normalized, all data is mined so that you're able to trend and make sense out of it and make decisions on how effectively you can manage these trends from a better perspective. The second example of the widget you see out here is also a business process element. So you could look at how each of your business processes are doing against a threshold of vulnerability count which you have defined as a threshold, and you can keep changing the threshold as found relevant, and really focus on business processes which are not working really well from a vulnerability count perspective, and really focus on them as to how they can be improved. These are some of the widgets on vulnerability information. Another different form of widgets, which again this specific customer we work with had, was something called an end-of-life risk. Now this is an important piece which sometimes gets missed out because end-of-life technologies pose serious security risks simply because the source vendors are not going to release patches and mitigation measures for those end-of-life systems. And they can be represented in very form. For example, you can have a time map and a vulnerability risk rating map on having when your specific technology is being sensitive, and create a map out of that saying, okay, I have an X operating system version which is T1, and I know from a time perspective when is the last patch to end of support, end of extended support, and how many vulnerabilities I found in them, and are they in the green zone or the yellow zone or the red zone. So it's a very obvious choice that anything which is in the red zone has to go through a technology refresh extremely quickly, because not only is the technology resetting, but there are more vulnerabilities found in them than others. So if you want to do a prioritization, you'll obviously sunset T4 first, then T2, and T1 kind of that's the kind of analytics you would do, mapping two different concepts, mapping end of life time as well as vulnerability time. The same can be represented differently from an impact perspective, from a timeline and vulnerability perspective. So again, end of life risk is something which gets missed out, but because of analytical systems, they can be analyzed and effectively mitigated. Remediation trends, I talked about how one could even analyze the mitigation process. Now these are some of the widgets which can be used for doing that. And again, what you see here is what are the, for example, open vulnerabilities over a period of time, and you would see representation of a low, medium, high vulnerabilities if that's how your severity definitions are. And in our customer, they had 3 definitions, and you could see your trends based on time as to how you are doing as opposed to open vulnerabilities. And of course, then having an aggregate of all of that too. Trending is important for us to know where we are and what needs to be done. Of course, this can be further broken down into business units and groups and things like that, which can be further used for analysis here. And again, these are very contextual to the environment, not only contextual to the vulnerabilities, but also contextual to the process being used in a specific organization. The other one you see on the slide is an extremely important visualization as well as to what are the reasons for vulnerabilities to be open. And let's say in our customer situation, there are 4 primary reasons. They had patch availability from vendors. They also had a workaround availability where patch was not available. They had deployment issues because QC of the patches was not done. Once patches were deployed, some applications were not working, so they had deployment issues. And they simply had things in the queue because there's just too much to do. So hence having a visualization on which kind of vulnerabilities lie in which bucket for us to do mapping over a period of time as to what needs to be focused on. For example, if you see a lot of stuff in the queue, so obviously it's the process of mitigation in terms of resources which is not working too well, or simply the volume of work is way too much. So how do we prioritize that a little more? If it's deployment issues, then of course testing is a key area for us to work on and stuff like that. So the idea here is to use analytics on top of the mitigation process to really make sense of what's going on and what needs to be improved. So you see here that I've presented to you various kinds of widgets, and obviously all of them are dependent on the platform which is used for intelligence as well as analytics and visualization. So what is this platform? So what you see deployed in our customer environment is a platform called SAVP by August. We call it a security analytics and visualization platform. It essentially is a platform for security intelligence and analytics, and we have used it for various kinds of use cases across customers globally. What I presented to you today is the vulnerability intelligence use case, and the whole power of the platform is because it can be completely customized to a specific use case, and even each use case can be customized further, as you saw in this example as well. Likewise, we have used the platform for various kinds of other use cases in security, like client assurance, where external clients, internal clients have their own visualization from a reporting perspective. A Fortune 20 tech major has used the platform for external reporting of vulnerabilities, like product advisories and things like that. We also have the platform integrated with SIM technologies for enhanced reporting and enhancements to kind of visualizations, which I talked about already. So, in summary, what I'd like to say is vulnerability management is, of course, a big piece of the puzzle. We have been doing it for decades. Having said that, we have still a lot of work to do to get it right in every organization. All of us face different challenges. I talked about 3 main challenges we see in our customer face, and we also talked about how intelligence and analytics can be used to solve some of those problems, to really make the mundane aspect of vulnerability management effective and useful from a risk management perspective. So that's all I have to say at this point in time. Tom, back to you.
Well, very good, Samir. I appreciate your time and your insight in leading us through your presentation. We've got the opportunity now to take some questions from the audience. I want to remind attendees, if you have questions for Samir and you've not submitted them already, take the opportunity to submit them now via the chat window that you see on your screen. I'm sure we won't have time to get to every question today, but for those questions that we don't answer in the course of this session, we will be able to take the time to get a response back to you via email. That said, we've got some questions that have come through. Samir, you ready?
Sure, Tom.
First question I have for you. How critical is having a comprehensive configuration management database for vulnerability management to work?
Oh, I mean, great question. I think all of us struggle with this question all the time. So in theory, yes, we should have a proper, sustained, live CMDB for vulnerability management to work, simply because we should know what assets we have and what configuration those assets have for us to know what to patch and what the open issues are and things like that. So in theory, yes, we should have a good CMDB in place. But the reality is that a lot of organizations really don't have that in place. And I would hence say that while it is good to have that, it should not be a prerequisite to run a comprehensive vulnerability management program. We still have to learn to live without it. And that's where having unstructured asset data inputs, which are not accurate and things like that, should be part of the given situation, and our vulnerability management program should be able to work with that. We just can't depend on the fact that we should have a proper CMDB. That's the ideal world, but reality is different.
Next question, Samir. Many say that the find and fix method of vulnerability management doesn't work anymore, and you mentioned it as well. Well, does that mean that organizations should not spend efforts on the find process?
I don't think we can ignore the find process, and what I guess we all mean by the find process is the whole process of vulnerability assessment and penetration testing and things like that. And of course, this is one whole part of compliance requirements. So we do have compliance requirements which tell us that we have to do VA, PT stuff. But that aside, I think the find process is an important process. It is a process where we look for vulnerabilities and software weaknesses and system weaknesses in our environment, and I think that's an important step in finding what vulnerabilities exist in the environment. I think what I would say is that's an important aspect, but that's not the only aspect, and I've seen a lot of organizations depend only on that. and that's not going to help us sustain. We should be able to have systems where we incorporate vulnerability information from non-fine processes. Some of them we talked about in this conversation. So what I would say is a fine process is important for more reasons than one, but that should not be the only process we depend on to identify vulnerabilities which impact us.
Samir, why is visualization, reporting, customization so important? Now, is it so that what works for one company should also work for another company of a similar type and size?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, one would think so, right? That if you are a payment processing organization, the second payment processing organization would have similar things to report on, risk to report on, and things like that. But the fact is, I think all of us are different, and what you like to see, Tom, and what I would like to see of the same data is different, and then what it makes sense to us is different, and it's not even just different once; it is different even with us over a period of time. It's simply because the roles we play in organizations, the challenges we have, what is priority and important for us at what point in time is very different. In fact, I've seen reactions on even simple things like, I would like to see red, green, and amber. I would like to see high, medium, low. I would like to see weather patterns. I would like to see something else. So I think it's a function of the roles and the actors which play in that. The content may look similar, but realistically for us security managers, if we need to attract attention of our own folks as well as people outside, we have to give them reports and visualizations which are very contextual and which are live and keep changing as time change. At the end of the day, the output deliverable of this entire process to them are those reports and visualizations, and hence if we make them contextual, we would then attract attention to what we want them to look at. So yeah, it in theory may work, but I think in practice we have to make them relevant to all actors in play at all points in time as relevant.
Well, Samir, we've got time for one more question, but I do want to remind attendees, if you have additional questions for Samir, do submit them via the chat window on your screen. If we've not answered your question today, we will get a response back to you via email. So Samir, final question. Does the Algis SAVP replace vulnerability assessment and or vulnerability management platforms?
It does not. It basically complements the whole process. So SAVP is not about having tools to do assessments and things like that. It is basically a platform, intelligence and analytics platform, which sits on top of all the good tools you use, both vulnerability assessment and management. And the whole idea is, how do you add intelligence and analytics to the whole process? So no, it does not replace any one of them. It could replace certain features and functionalities, but the whole idea is that how does it complement your vulnerability management program and the tools you use, and hence we have architected the platform in such a way that it is very easy to integrate with existing platforms and tools. It does not depend on complex APIs and things like that. It uses new age flexible models like parsing and things like that, which makes the integration fairly quick and effective. So no, it does not replace tools. It definitely complements a lot of them in the vulnerability management lifecycle.
Well, very good, Samir. Again, I appreciate your time and your insight today, not just for your presentation, but for taking time to answer these questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Of course, I also want to thank each of our attendees. You took time out of your day to attend this session, and we're grateful. I trust that today's discussion provided valuable data points to enable you and your organization to be even better prepared to tackle the critical security issues we've discussed today. I look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming events. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you very much.